Most software engineers compare Switzerland and Germany based on salary numbers and taxes. What almost nobody looks at is the employment contract itself. And that's exactly where many people get surprised after they've already moved. I know this from experience because I worked as a software engineer in both Germany and Switzerland. I've signed contracts in both systems myself, and I've seen firsthand how different job security, working hours, termination rules, and long-term upside really are. In this video, I'll walk you through the 5 real differences between Swiss and German employment contracts from the perspective of a software engineer. The termination rules between those two countries couldn't be less similar. You might maybe think both countries speak German and culturally are in many ways similar, but the termination rules are really very different. Germany tends to have relatively strong employee protection. For an employer, it's really hard to terminate a work contract, at least a permanent work contract. There needs to be a good legal reason, like they totally can't just arbitrarily let you go. If it's a time-limited contract, it's a bit easier because obviously there's a time limit involved, though they could just not extend it. But an indefinite work contract in Germany, it's really hard to terminate for the employer. So this means for you, it leads to a very high job security in general. In Switzerland, on the other hand, it's much closer to the US. Not quite the same culturally, but legally it's much closer, meaning that work contract can be terminated pretty much any time from both sides, not without a notice period. In Switzerland, there is a notice period, and it's a bit longer than in the US. It's not something where typically you're fired on like the same day or something. But most importantly, in Switzerland, both sides can just terminate a work contract for no reason at all. Like your employer could literally say, or think, I don't want to work with you anymore, I don't like you. They probably wouldn't say that, but they will just terminate the work contract if that's the case. And that's it. So only the notice period matters. The notice period is typically around 1 to 3 months. You will very often find arrangements where, for example, in the very beginning, in the probation period, the notice period might actually be like 7 days or something. And then afterwards, in the first year, it might be 1 month. And then over time, it goes up to 3 months. So this is a bit longer than maybe in the US, but overall, it's kind of similar, especially compared to Germany, where notice periods tend to go up over time. And it's really hard for the employer to fire you. So what does this really mean in reality? At first, you might say, well, Germany looks much safer, Switzerland looks much riskier because notice periods are shorter and you can be fired for basically many reasons, while in Germany it's more difficult. But here's a counterintuitive twist. If you're actually high in demand and you believe it will remain like this for many years to come, then the higher flexibility that you have in Switzerland can actually be to your advantage. Because just imagine this. You're at the end of your first year in a job that you haven't started that long ago. But you're realizing, maybe this doesn't work out for whatever reason. And you're looking for something better. Then it's kind of a tough sale if you say, my notice period is 3 months in Germany, versus if you can just say, oh, my notice period is just 1 month. I could be on board more or less like next month or a little later in Switzerland. So the shorter notice periods in Switzerland can also give you more flexibility to get out of bad jobs faster. But of course, be careful, don't overdo it. Don't do that one time after the other, because job hopping is also not so popular in Switzerland. Now, a quick note before we move on. If you're currently comparing offers from Germany and Switzerland, and you're not sure how these contract differences play out for your specific role, level, and risk tolerance, that is completely normal. I know the feeling myself. If you want, you can book a short call with me, and we'll map this to your exact situation. The link is, as always, down in the description. Working hours and the structure of it, especially regarding overtime, are a little bit different between Germany and Switzerland. Germany, the default number of hours is about 40 hours per week. You will find variations, 38 hours, maybe sometimes even less, but the default is still 40. And in Switzerland, it's more like 42.5. Don't ask me why is this exact number. It's basically 8.5 hours per day. And if you combine it with the vacation day difference, it means you work roughly 2 weeks extra per year. So the surplus of salary in Switzerland is not only higher productivity or sort of a compensation for a higher cost of living, it is because you actually do work some more hours. And then there's less public holidays, about 1 week less regular vacation in Switzerland, on average at least. So this basically adds to the whole calculation. But important, it's up to negotiation. It's not like this is governed by law, at least not a maximum, only the minimum is governed by law. Overtime in Germany is usually compensated explicitly, like it's tracked every hour, and then you sometimes get a handsome surcharge, kind of handsome premium for working extra hours. But be aware the taxes are very high, so actually after taxes, it's usually not really worth it to work extra hours. So don't think too much about doing overtime and then you get rich from this. This is definitely not happening in Germany. Whereas in Switzerland, overtime is not necessarily automatically compensated. So often it just says in the contract it's kind of included. So if you work extra hours, you don't get any extra money, at least not directly. And you have to look at it like, when does this actually happen in software engineering? Junior and mid-level roles, very often there is not really overtime or very little overtime, an hour here or there, but nothing very big. Whereas in senior and management roles, overtime can happen much more often because you're more responsible for deviations in how the business is run. It's much more likely that there might be an emergency on the weekend and so on. So there, it's more likely that this actually happens, and then sort of it kicks in this difference in terms of compensation. But in Switzerland, you're often indirectly compensated. First of all, as a manager, you also get a higher base salary, but you often get bonuses based on your performance, company performance, or especially in consulting, you might get a bonus based on billable hours. So of course, if you work more billable hours, then your bonus will probably be higher. And what also sometimes happens is that you just get like an extra week of vacation every year as sort of a compensation that sometimes you will work overtime. The really important thing here is that you need to look at the whole deal and negotiate the whole deal very well. Because if you actually do it smart and you know what you can demand, then this can be really attractive for you. In especially Switzerland, you make more money, you keep more money because taxes are lower. Whereas if you're not careful, if you let yourself get exploited, then you're just silently overworking yourself and your salary isn't really as good anymore as you might think it is. So be very careful about how you negotiate your deal. Lots of potential, but quite some danger involved here as well. So don't make this mistake of just looking at like monthly payouts or your gross salary. I see this so many people doing, like saying, oh, I have whatever, 100K in country one and then 95K in country two as an offer. I should definitely go for the 100K offer in country one because this must be better. And that's not necessarily the case because, salary structure might be quite similar in those two countries, right? You often have a base salary, you have a bonus and RSUs in big tech companies, but also sometimes in startups. But the taxation is so different. And again, it depends on region where you actually are. Some Swiss cities, regions have relatively high taxes, others have more moderate taxes. So you have to keep that in mind. Also in Germany, depending on how you're insured, part of your health insurance might already be deducted, whereas in Switzerland you always have to pay 100% of it. So basically, if you deduct the health insurance from your net salary, then it might be lower than you initially thought. And also you might see things like a 13th salary payment in Switzerland. Don't be confused by that because this is just a way to pay it out. Like you basically in December or whenever the fiscal year ends, you will just have a higher salary. But the only thing that matters is the annual total that you actually get, not how it's paid out. In some industries, you might see a bit more bonuses in Switzerland, higher bonuses in general. than in Germany. So basically it's this work hard, play hard environment where performance is rewarded more, but of course also where you might be a bit more under pressure. So it's really important. Compare, for example, the annual net salary after taxes and social security deducted, or even better, compare your savings number, the savings potential, which is actually the best number, but of course it's much more complicated to calculate it. And keep in mind, the Swiss regions have very different deductibles, and even the German regions slightly differ. So you have to run the exact math. It's usually not done in 3 seconds, but it's far more complicated than that. So if you see two contracts with similar gross salaries, which can actually happen because Germany has caught up a bit in terms of the gross salary you will find in a work contract, the outcomes can be completely different. It depends also on your number of children and so on. So you have to do the exact same math. And in doubt, you can always give me a call and we can run the exact same numbers, because you might be surprised how big the differences really are in the end in terms of the actual savings rate you're going to have each month. If we compare these two countries, we have to talk about the different pension fund systems, because chances are you're young and you don't think about this. And on the surface, they actually look relatively similar, but they couldn't be more different in practice. Because Germany has a strongly redistribution-based system, where basically the current pensions and then in the future your pension will be paid by the current working generations and also by the taxpayer. Which is kind of nice, if you're unemployed for a long time, or if your salary is relatively low and you end up not paying much into the system, you're actually getting comparatively much out of the system. On the flip side, the Swiss system is much, much better for you if you think you're not going to be unemployed for very long and your salary is going to be relatively high and you're going to end up paying a lot into it, because you actually also get way more out of it, since it's for the most part, your own account. And in the Swiss system, you can even invest the capital over time into, like a part of it can be invested into stocks, and even this very small part can even be invested in things like Bitcoin and so on. So over time, it compounds, and you might have a very, very good amount of capital once you hit the retirement age, which is currently at 65. So overall, if you believe that you're going to have a lot of years of employment and a good salary, then the Swiss system is much, much better for you. But of course, if you believe AI will take your job, maybe the German system is better for you. You really have to decide, but I would say the paths are very clear based on what you believe the future will be like. Let's look briefly at how the market size influences your wealth accumulation. So if you look at the map, you will easily see Germany is bigger. Obviously, the market is also bigger in Germany versus Switzerland. It's also important that it's easier to hop between jobs in Germany than in Switzerland. In Switzerland, it's still a bit frowned upon. They might actually ask you, like, why did you leave this job after less than 2 years? If you do that a couple of times, unless obviously it's consulting freelancing. But even then, people might ask, like, okay, why do you want to have a permanent position now? So this can sometimes lead you to not being interviewed at all, or making the second and third round more difficult. On the flip side, while Germany is easier to hop around and maybe even make it into management, salaries actually level off much faster. Whereas in Switzerland, even like a senior developer role might already be more than an engineering manager in Germany. So your wealth tends to grow faster in Switzerland. But of course, also there are fewer role variations. So if you want to do something in a new industry, maybe that industry isn't really big in Switzerland. So Germany, in this case, if you really want to stick to a certain industry like automotive, for example, could be the better choice if this is so important for you. So basically the trade-off you have to make is, do you want to explore a bit more, but this comes at quite a cost? Or do you want to already optimize for compounding and wealth building, having more money, for example, saving towards a really nice house? Maybe not in Switzerland because houses are very expensive, but with the money saved, you could buy a really nice house in some other country after working, let's say, 10 years. And not even, you might not even need a mortgage then, depending on where you buy it. But of course, it means that you need to stick to something for a longer amount of time, and you should ideally already know where you want to spend all those years. So let's combine things a bit. How should you make a decision? And I know this can be really difficult. You need to basically make up your mind. Like, what do you value most? Is it more job security? Is it more predictability in terms of a financial sense? Is it more strict labor laws and maybe just not such an intensive life, where your work performance doesn't really influence your finances that much in both directions? Like, you don't get rewarded as much, but you also don't risk as much. If, for example, you think that AI will take your job, Germany might actually be the better option. Whereas on the flip side, if you basically want to work hard, play hard, then Switzerland is probably the best country for you, because if you work hard and everything goes well, you're going to make a lot more money, and you might be more confident in your skills if money is important for you. You might actually be a bit more flexible from sort of an entrepreneurial and job changing perspective, but do keep in mind job hopping, like quick changes in a row, are also not so easy in Switzerland. And generally, you're okay with having a bit more stress, a bit higher expectations, but of course, over the long run, much more money. So I would say if you're looking for sort of a more American equivalent in Europe, then Switzerland is definitely the better choice. If instead you want to have a more chill and relaxed life, then probably Germany is your choice. As you've seen, Switzerland and Germany don't just differ in salary or taxes. The employment contract alone can change how much risk you carry, how flexible you are, and how much you can realistically earn over time. If you're currently thinking about moving to Switzerland, the next thing you need to understand is how salaries there actually work. This is where many engineers misjudge offers, negotiate in the wrong order, or focus on the wrong numbers. In the next video, I will break down what really determines your salary in Switzerland and what you need to look at before you accept an offer. If you want to make sure you don't leave money on the table when moving to Switzerland, watch that video next.